Ma'am, could you be my mommy just for one day? The words sliced through the ambient chatter of Blue Moon Cafe like a sudden hush of winter wind. Victoria Morgan looked up from her lukewarm cappuccino, her second one, in less than 10 minutes and blinked. A small boy stood before her, no more than 6 years old. His hair was tousled as if he'd been running. A green army-style jacket, 2 sizes too big, swallowed his thin frame. But what truly stopped her, what froze Victoria Morgan, CEO of Morgan Financial Group. A woman known for making grown men stammer in boardrooms were his eyes. Bright, clear, and heartbreakingly sincere. Jason! A breathless voice called from behind him. A man tall, scruffy, and clearly exhausted rushed over, a crumpled grocery bag slung over one shoulder. His hoodie was damp from the drizzle outside, and the sneakers on his feet had clearly seen better years. He looked like someone who had forgotten what sleep felt like. "I'm so sorry," he gasped, gently pulling the boy behind him. "He runs off sometimes. I just lost my wallet, and then a delivery got canceled and—" God, I must have looked away for a second. Victoria said nothing. Instead, she looked down at the boy, who was still holding on to the hem of her cashmere coat. "Why would you want me to be your mom?" she asked, her voice low and steady, though something in her chest gave an unfamiliar tug. "Because tomorrow's family day at school," the boy Jason answered without hesitation. "All the kids are bringing their moms or dads. I don't have a mom, but you look like someone who'd be nice, even if you looked kind of mad at your coffee." There was a beat of silence. Then two. The barista at the register froze mid-wipe. A couple sipping lattes near the window had gone still. One teenager in the corner slowly lifted his phone, perhaps to record. The father flushed crimson. "Ma'am, really, I'm sorry. He just says stuff sometimes." "You don't need to—" "What's his name?" Victoria interrupted softly. The man blinked. "Jason? Jason Carter." She turned her gaze back to the boy. "And what school?" "Westwood Elementary, first grade. Room 108, he said proudly. "Family day starts at 10 short Michael stepped forward, suddenly wary. "Look, I don't want any trouble. You've probably got a million things to do and places to be. I'm not asking for your resume," Victoria said curtly. She knelt, leveling her gaze with the boys. "Do you think I'd make a good pretend mommy?" Jason grinned. "Only for a day. I think you'd be awesome." Victoria nodded once. "All right then. Just for a day." Michael gawked. "Wait, really? You don't have to." But she was already walking away, heels clicking sharply across the tile. She didn't look back. Not when whispers chased her like perfume. Not even when someone muttered, "Isn't that Victoria Morgan?" What just happened? Michael wondered, staring at the woman who had just promised to show up in his son's life, if only for a morning. That night, Victoria stared into her untouched glass of wine on the 32nd floor of her Upper East Side penthouse. City lights glittered like tiny fires beyond the window, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. "You're thinking about the boy," her assistant's voice crackled through the speakerphone. "I'm thinking about how hard it is to get a cappuccino made right," she replied dryly. Then, after a pause, His eyes reminded me of Sarah." Victoria murmured the name like it fell from her lips as a stone in water, small but rippling far. Sarah, her younger sister, gone 4 years now, taken by the invisible hands of postpartum depression. The baby, too, had been lost. Victoria had buried them both, and with them, every flicker of softness left in her. Since then, she'd built walls, not homes, made deals, not memories. But Jason had asked her to stay, just for a day. And somewhere inside that question, something had cracked. 10:00 a.m. sharp, Westwood Elementary. Victoria stepped out of her sleek black Range Rover in a navy wool coat, understated but immaculate. No designer labels shouting for attention. No entourage. Just her. And in her hand, a small bouquet of white daisies and a single cupcake in a paper box. She spotted Jason instantly, standing near the school fence, fidgeting with his backpack straps, glancing at each car that pulled up with growing disappointment. Then his eyes lit up. "You came?" He ran to her, beaming so brightly she could almost feel it against her skin. "I thought maybe you were just being nice." "I don't make promises I don't intend to keep," she said, brushing a lock of hair from his face. He grabbed her hand, no hesitation, and pulled her past the gates. Children laughed. Parents waved. A banner hung across the schoolyard. "Welcome to Family Day because love makes a family." As Victoria crossed that threshold, something shifted. She thought she was showing up just for a little boy. She had no idea she was about to find something she hadn't even known she was missing. It was supposed to be 1 hour. That's what she told herself. Victoria Morgan didn't do children. She didn't do glitter glue, juice boxes, or sing-alongs. She did mergers. She did numbers. And if there was one thing she never did, it was unpredictability. Yet here she was, sitting cross-legged on a tiny blue rug inside a brightly lit classroom that smelled of crayons and apple juice. Her posture was stiff, her knees protested, and the paper crown someone had taped to her head itched like a curse. But the boy beside her, he was glowing. "This is my mommy," Jason announced proudly to a group of wide-eyed first graders. Then, a beat later, he added, "Just for today." A ripple of giggles followed, and Victoria heard a few other kids whisper, "Wow, she's pretty. She smells like vanilla and something fancy. Do all mommies wear high heels?" She almost corrected them, told them she wasn't anyone's mother, wasn't even remotely maternal. But then she saw Jason look up at her, hopeful, as if he was waiting to see if she'd vanish. So she stayed, and strangely, it didn't feel like charity. It didn't feel like playing dress up. It felt grounding. They painted with watercolors. Hers looked more like a stock graph melting than a rainbow. But Jason called it super cool. They built towers with foam blocks. Hers kept collapsing. They ate cupcakes, and Jason asked if she ever had lunch without talking about stocks. "Rarely," she replied. "Even my dog has a portfolio." He burst out laughing. "You have a dog?" She hesitated. "Had." The classroom blurred for a moment. A tiny sting pressed behind her eyes. She hadn't said Max's name aloud in 3 years. The golden retriever had belonged to Sarah. He passed not long after she did, as if he'd been waiting for permission to let go. Victoria shook the memory off just in time for Story Circle. The teacher, Miss Radcliffe Bennett, handed her a book titled Super Dads and Magical Moms. "Would you like to read to the class?" she asked. Victoria opened her mouth to decline. She was already pushing her comfort zone enough for one day. But Jason handed her the book, looking as if it was the only thing that mattered. So she read. Her voice started stiff, too formal, too rehearsed. But as the children leaned in, eyes wide, giggles erupting at the funny bits, gasps at the dramatic turns, she softened. Her voice found a rhythm that didn't feel like a boardroom presentation. It felt natural. Halfway through, Jason curled up against her side, head resting gently against her arm. She froze, not because it was uncomfortable, because it wasn't, because it felt too much like something she didn't know she had missed. "You smell like cookies," he mumbled, half asleep. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It crossed the room. Michael Carter stood quietly near the door. He had arrived 10 minutes ago but hadn't made a sound. He watched as his son leaned into Victoria, like he had always belonged there. Victoria didn't notice him until story time ended and the kids scattered. That's when she looked up, and their eyes met. He gave a slight nod, cautious but grateful. She returned it, but something in her throat tightened. Later, while the children were playing with finger puppets and paper masks, Victoria walked out into the hallway. Needing air, Michael followed her out. "I didn't expect you to really come," he said, his voice low and hoarse, as if he hadn't spoken to anyone in a while. "I said I would," she replied simply. He glanced at her. "A lot of people say things." There was no bitterness in his voice, just weariness, the kind that comes from too many promises broken too many times. Victoria studied him for the first time, really looked. He wasn't just tired, he was threadbare. But beneath the stubble and worn hoodie, there was a quiet strength, something solid and deeply human, something the polished men in her world lacked entirely. "How long have you been doing this alone?" she asked. "Since he was 2. Michael replied, "His mom, my wife, passed after a long illness. I've been playing every role ever since." She didn't offer condolences. She hated platitudes. Instead, she asked, "Do you have help?" He shook his head. "Some friends try, but everyone's got their own lives. I work gigs delivery, handyman stuff. I do what I can." He laughed under his breath. "You ever try gluing a science fair volcano together at 3:00 a.m. while your kid has a fever and there's a busted radiator leaking on the floor?" She didn't laugh back. She only said, with quiet honesty, "No, I haven't." A pause stretched between them. Then Michael looked at her sideways. "You didn't have to say yes, you know, to Jason." "I know. Then why did you—" Victoria took a long moment before answering. "I think," she started, voice softer than she meant it to be. "I think I remembered what it felt like to want something and be too small to ask for it. He asked anyway." Michael nodded slowly. "Yeah, that sounds like him." From inside, Jason's laughter rang out pure, unfiltered joy. Michael smiled, even as his shoulders sagged. "He's different, you know," he said. "Feels the world harder than other kids. Notices what's missing." Victoria's gaze didn't leave the door. "So do I." Michael glanced at her again, but this time with something closer to understanding than curiosity. Then he cleared his throat. "You're welcome to stay. You don't have to, but he'd like it." "I already told him just one day," she said, turning to leave. But even as the words left her lips, her feet didn't move. She looked back through the glass window of the classroom, where Jason was now showing her painting to another kid, beaming. That child had claimed her as something she never thought she could be, and for reasons she couldn't quite name, she hadn't corrected him. What if staying, just for a little while longer, wasn't as dangerous as she feared? And even more terrifying, what if it was? Victoria hadn't meant to return that evening. She sat behind the tinted windows of her SUV, watching a modest brick building across the street, a walk-up apartment with peeling paint and a flickering porch light. She hadn't told her driver to stop. She just hadn't told him to keep going. Inside, past the cracked blinds of a second-story window, a warm yellow light glowed. Faint laughter filtered through the chilly autumn air. And though she couldn't see clearly, she knew it was them. Michael, Jason, the boy who had asked her to stay, and the man who hadn't asked for anything at all. "Should I continue, Mr. Morgan?" her driver asked carefully. Victoria didn't answer. She opened the door. It started as a coincidence. She stopped by the school again, dropped off a book she thought Jason might enjoy, something about space and tigers and time travel. The next week, she was just passing through the park at recess. Then she found herself at the tiny corner grocery across from Michael's apartment, comparing brands of instant mac and cheese with no intention of buying either. He noticed. "Of course. Lost again," Michael teased gently one afternoon, leaning against a bike rack with Jason on his shoulders. "Or is this just where all the billionaires hang out nowadays?" "I was buying groceries," Victoria replied flatly. "You didn't actually buy anything." She paused. "I changed my mind." Jason leaned down from his perch, grinning. "She just likes us. Dad, you can say hi." Michael smirked. "That obvious?" "Huh." Victoria turned to Jason. "What makes you think I like you?" "You don't wear your sunglasses when you're with us," he said matter-of-factly. "That's how I know you're not hiding." Her lips curved just slightly. She hated how easily he disarmed her. Michael set Jason down. "We're about to eat dinner. It's just spaghetti. You hungry?" Victoria hesitated. She had a reservation at a steakhouse downtown, a phone full of emails, and at least 2 fund managers waiting for her approval on a merger. She had an empire to run, and yet I could eat. Their apartment was smaller than her walk-in closet. A narrow hallway led into a living room where the furniture was mismatched, the wallpaper peeling at the corners, and the heat came from a portable radiator buzzing near the window. but it was warm, lived in, safe. The table was a fold-out card table with 3 chairs. Michael boiled spaghetti in a scratched-up pot, while Jason gave Victoria a grand tour of his room, which doubled as a storage closet and a spaceship, depending on the day. "Sorry about the mess," Michael said, setting out plates. "We were going to clean this weekend." "It's fine," Victoria replied, settling into the chair. "I'm not here for the decor." Jason dug into his food with enthusiasm, strands of spaghetti hanging from his chin like red streamers. Victoria watched him, strangely mesmerized. She hadn't eaten at a kitchen table without a linen napkin and a waiter in years. Michael sat across from her. "So how does someone like you end up spending time with people like us?" "People like you," she repeated, eyebrow raised. "You know what I mean. We're not exactly in your tax bracket." Victoria's fork paused midair. Then she set it down. "I don't remember the last time someone looked me in the eye and just spoke." Michael tilted his head. "That's sad." "No," she said. "It's honest." He studied her then. Not the way the press did. Not the way her board members did. Calculating leverage. He looked at her like a person, and she felt exposed. She cleared her throat. "Jason's a good kid." Michael smiled softly. "He's everything." A silence settled between them, comfortable but heavy with unsaid things. Victoria finally asked, "You ever think about starting over?" Michael leaned back in his chair. "Starting over sounds expensive." "It doesn't have to be," he chuckled. "No offense, but in your world, even breathing costs extra." "I mean it." Her voice softened. "You deserve more than this." His expression changed. Not offended, not grateful, just tired. "I'm not looking for more," he said. "I'm looking for enough." Victoria blinked. "That's not something I hear often." He met her eyes. "That's because you don't spend much time with people who've lost everything." The air between them shifted. She felt it, the weight of his words, the gravity of survival. He wasn't bitter. He wasn't defeated. He was just real. "I lost my sister," she said suddenly, "to postpartum depression." She didn't tell anyone until it was too late. Michael's features softened. "She was the kind one," Victoria whispered. "The brave one. I built empires to forget her. But some things don't stay buried." He didn't offer her comfort. He didn't say it gets better. He just sat there with her. In the mess of it, Jason broke the silence. "Do you think I'll be tall when I grow up?" he asked, eyes big and hopeful. Michael grinned. "Taller than me, that's for sure." "I want to be strong like Daddy," Jason added, then looked at Victoria. "And smart like you." She blinked. Something sharp and sweet twisted in her chest. After dinner, as she stood in the doorway, pulling on her coat, Jason wrapped his arms around her waist. "Are you going to come back?" he whispered. Victoria crouched, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Do you want me to?" He nodded hard. She looked up at Michael. He didn't say a word. He didn't plead or ask or push. He just stood there, letting her choose, and that's what made it so unbearable. He never once asked for her to stay, and for the first time in her life, she wanted someone to. The rain started softly, barely more than mist, but by the time Victoria stepped out of the boardroom, it had thickened into a steady downpour. Her driver was delayed, and she had left her umbrella in the office, a rare lapse in preparation. But she didn't turn back. She walked, heels clicking against the wet pavement, hair slowly darkening from the drizzle. Victoria Morgan made her way through a part of town she never had reason to visit before. The buildings here weren't made of glass and ambition. They were brick and memory. Worn, imperfect, lived in. She told herself she didn't know why her feet were moving in this direction, but she knew. She wanted to see them again. The apartment door opened to the smell of tomato sauce and something faintly burnt. Jason's face lit up the moment he saw her. "You came back," he shouted, arms flinging around her waist with no hesitation. "I didn't bring dessert," Victoria warned, a small smile tugging at her lips. "That's okay," he said. "We saved you a seat." Michael appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, holding a wooden spoon and wearing an apron that said chefish. His eyebrows lifted in amusement. Rough day at the office. Or are you auditioning for the next shampoo commercial? Victoria looked down. Her designer blouse was soaked through, clinging to her skin. I walked, she said simply. Michael stared at her for a beat longer than necessary. Not judgmental, not curious, just surprised. I'll get you a towel. She stepped inside, slipping off her wet coat. The apartment smelled like real life. Laundry soap, garlic, crayons, everything her penthouse lacked. Jason tugged at her hand. Come see the spaceship we made. Victoria let him pull her down the hallway. His room, barely big enough for a twin mattress and a box of toys, had transformed. Blankets were draped over chairs. Flashlights illuminated the cockpit. Paper stars dangled from string. This is amazing, she said. We're going to Jupiter, Jason announced. You can be the co-pilot. I've never been to Jupiter. He grinned. Neither have we. That's the fun part. Dinner was chaos. The spaghetti was slightly overcooked, and the garlic bread was more charcoal than golden. Victoria sat at the fold-out table with a paper napkin in her lap and a plastic cup of tap water. Jason told stories with his mouth full. Michael asked her if she knew the difference between basil and oregano, then laughed when she didn't. You're not what I expected, Michael said later, after Jason had fallen asleep in a pile of comic books. And what exactly did you expect? I don't know. He leaned back in the creaky chair. Someone colder, sharper, someone who doesn't get spaghetti sauce on her blouse. She looked down. A red smear bloomed near her collar. I haven't had a meal without a meeting attached to it in 5 years, she said. Michael tilted his head. Do you ever get tired of all that? What success? No. Being alone in a room full of people who only want what you can give them? She didn't answer right away. Her eyes drifted toward the hallway where Jason was sleeping. I used to think being needed was dangerous, she said quietly. That if someone needed me, they could hurt me. And now I think maybe not being needed at all is worse. Michael didn't speak. He just reached over and gently refilled her cup with water. Not wine, not some expensive label, just water. And for some reason, it was the kindest thing anyone had done for her in months. Later, she stood by the door, coat dry now, hair frizzing at the edges. Michael leaned against the frame beside her. He asked about you this morning, he said. Jason wanted to know if you were still his, just for a day, Mommy. What did you say? I told him the truth. Michael met her gaze. That I don't know. Victoria swallowed. The words settled deep, more honest than she was ready for. He's getting attached, Michael added gently. I just need to know if this is something real for you, because it is for him. I don't know how to do this, Victoria admitted. You don't have to be perfect, he said. You just have to show up. That's simple. And yet the weight of it was enormous. She nodded once, then looked up at him, eyes darker now in the soft hallway light. I don't want to be another person who walks away. Michael's voice was quiet, steady. Then don't. That night, back in her penthouse, Victoria stared out the window. The city was alive beneath her, glittering and ceaseless. But for the first time, it felt far away, like another planet. She walked to her bookshelf, rows of leather-bound volumes, books on finance, leadership, case studies, and power. She slid one off the shelf and placed it on the table. Then she picked up a crayon drawing Jason had slipped into her bag earlier that evening. It was the three of them, stick figures smiling. A tall one in a suit, a smaller one with scruff, and a tiny figure with curly hair holding both their hands. Above them, written in crooked, colorful letters, My family, just for now. Victoria stared at it for a long time. Something inside her whispered, just for now doesn't have to stay just for now. But could she really let herself believe in that? Could she, after all this time, trust the quiet, messy, imperfect kind of love that didn't come with contracts or conditions? Victoria Morgan had dined in Michelin-starred restaurants with chandeliers worth more than some people's homes. She'd sat across from kings, presidents, and hedge fund titans. Her expression unreadable, her words perfectly timed. But tonight, she found herself in a tiny, dimly lit kitchen, eating reheated pizza from a mismatched plate, with a 6-year-old beside her who insisted she try dipping it in ketchup. And for some reason, it felt like the most human thing she'd done in years. "You know," Victoria said, eyeing the bottle with genuine concern. "Ketchup." Jason looked scandalized. "That's the best part," Michael chuckled from the counter, where he was rinsing dishes in the sink that dripped steadily with a rhythmic plink sound. "She's a fancy lady. Bud probably eats pizza with a knife and fork." "I do not," Victoria said, then paused. "Okay, maybe once, in Geneva." Jason laughed so hard he nearly choked on his crust. Michael tossed her a clean dish towel. "Try not to kill our guest." "All right," he said, ruffling Jason's curls. Victoria caught the towel with a soft smile and dabbed at the boy's chin. He leaned into her hand without hesitation, and her heart twisted again, in that same unfamiliar way it had been twisting ever since that morning at the cafe. She didn't understand how this child, this family, had carved out a space inside her so quickly, so deeply, but the longer she stayed, the more it scared her, and the more it mattered. After dinner, Jason declared that it was movie night. "We watch The Iron Giant when we've had a good day," he announced. "It's our rule." Michael raised an eyebrow at Victoria. "You're in luck. It was a good day." She wanted to ask for whom, but instead, she just nodded. They piled onto the couch, Jason between them, arms full of blankets and a stuffed dinosaur with one eye missing. The movie flickered onto the screen, painting their faces in soft blue light. Jason's laughter came easily, but Victoria found herself watching him more than the film. At one point, Michael looked over, caught her staring. "What?" she asked, embarrassed. "Nothing," he said. "You just don't look like you're pretending." "I'm not," he nodded, then turned back to the screen. "Good." She didn't know what that meant, but it felt like something later. After the movie ended, and Jason had fallen asleep curled between them, Michael gently lifted him in his arms and carried him to bed. Victoria followed behind, pausing in the doorway as Michael pulled the blanket up to his son's chin. "Do you ever get scared?" she asked quietly. Michael looked at her, then back at Jason. "Every day. Of what? Losing him, failing him, not being enough." Victoria leaned against the frame. "But you're here, every day. That has to count for something." Michael stood, his voice lower now, edged with something raw. "I used to think showing up was the bare minimum. But it's everything. Because the world doesn't wait for you. It doesn't care if you're tired or broke or grieving. If you don't show up, it moves on without you." She swallowed the lump in her throat. "You're a good father, Michael." He looked at her. "And you're not what I expected." There was silence, thick but not uncomfortable. Then she said, "I don't know how to belong to something I didn't build." "You don't build families," he said. "You love them." And with that, he turned off the light, back in the living room. Victoria lingered. Her coat was folded neatly over the armrest. Her phone buzzed with a dozen missed calls and emails she had no desire to return. Michael came back out, drying his hands on a towel. "You okay?" "I don't know." He nodded as if that made perfect sense. "You know," he said slowly, "I used to think people like you didn't feel things like the rest of us. And now I think you feel everything. You've just gotten really good at hiding it." Victoria laughed softly. "You're too perceptive for someone who owns 3 shirts." He smirked. "Hey, 4. I bought a new one at Goodwill last week." She stared at him. The man in front of her was unlike anyone she'd ever known. No pretense, no performance, just truth. And it humbled her more than any boardroom defeat ever could. "What if I don't know how to stay?" she asked. Michael didn't move, didn't flinch, just said quietly, "Then start with dinner." Her breath caught. "Dinner," she repeated. "Come back tomorrow, bring something terrible. Or don't. Just show up. No pressure, no roles, no pretending." She nodded, unsure if she was agreeing to dinner or to something much bigger. That night, as she lay in bed, no city skyline, no glass walls, no designer sheets, just the pull-out couch and the faint sound of rain against the windows, Victoria closed her eyes. And for the first time in years, sleep came easily. Meanwhile, in the next room, Michael watched his son sleep and whispered, "She stayed." And in the quiet that followed, a thought settled in his chest like a question wrapped in hope. It started with a photo, just a blurry, overexposed shot on someone's phone. Victoria Morgan stepping out of a rundown apartment building in Brooklyn, holding the hand of a little boy. No security detail, no press statement, no explanation, and no one to stop the wildfire once it began. By noon the next day, her name was trending. Victoria Morgan, secret life billionaire, CEO playing house in the projects. Who is the child beside Victoria Morgan? Within hours, gossip blogs, finance sites, and even national news outlets had picked it up. They dissected her clothing, the neighborhood, the timestamp. Some speculated she had an illegitimate child. Others claimed it was a PR move. A few dug into Michael Carter's name and found, mercifully, little. He had no social media, no scandal, just tax records and a small mountain of debt. By the time Victoria saw the headlines, it was too late. She didn't call, didn't text, didn't show up for dinner that night. Jason sat on the couch, swinging his legs, glancing at the door every few minutes. "Maybe she got busy," Michael said gently, setting down a plate of grilled cheese that went untouched. "She said she'd come," Jason whispered. "She promised." And Michael, who had spent years teaching his son that people leave for all kinds of reasons, had no idea how to explain this one. 3 days passed. On the fourth morning, Michael opened the door to find her standing there. No bodyguards, no makeup, no shield, just Victoria. She looked exhausted. "Can I come in?" she asked, voice small. Jason, hearing her voice, came running. He froze in the hallway, unsure, as if afraid she might disappear if he blinked. Victoria dropped to her knees. "I'm so sorry." He ran into her arms. Later, after Jason had fallen asleep with his head on her lap and the weight of disappointment lifted from his tiny chest, Michael stood in the kitchen, pouring 2 mugs of coffee. His eyes never left her. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. She didn't pretend to misunderstand. "I didn't want this part of my life to feel like a transaction," she said. Michael handed her a mug. "You think I'd have treated you differently if I'd known you were a billionaire?" She looked up. "Wouldn't you have?" He didn't blink. "No, because I never cared about your last name, Victoria. I cared about how Jason smiled around you, about how you looked at him like he was more than a side note." She swallowed hard. "It's been a long time since anyone saw me without the title." "You know what I see," Michael said. "A woman who showed up, who sat on my busted couch and let a 6-year-old cover her in glitter. That woman, she's real." She laughed, eyes wet. "You're not going to give me a lecture." "No." He sipped his coffee. "But I will give you a question." She waited. "What do you want this to be?" The words landed with terrifying clarity. "I don't know," she said. "Then figure it out," he replied, "before someone else tries to define it for you." But the world didn't wait. That weekend, a black SUV pulled up outside the apartment. A man in a gray suit stepped out and handed Michael an envelope. It was a formal notice from a corporate oversight committee. Victoria Morgan's presence in the media, connected to an emotionally vulnerable civilian and minor, was now considered a reputational risk to her firm's image and holdings. Inside was a warning. Any continued association with Mr. Michael Carter and his child, outside of officially sanctioned charity or PR efforts, may result in shareholder inquiry and board review. Michael stared at the paper. When Victoria arrived that evening, he didn't say hello. He just handed her the letter. She read it in silence. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded it back. "I didn't authorize this," she said. "But you built the machine that did," he replied. There was no anger in his voice, just truth. "I can fight it," she said quickly. "I can fix this." Michael looked at her for a long, Long time. Can you? He asked. Because the next time someone decides we're inconvenient, I don't want my son left wondering if he mattered. Victoria stepped forward, eyes blazing. Don't do that. Do what? Don't pretend like I don't care. Michael's voice cracked. I know you care. That's the problem. Because for the first time in a long time, I care too. They stood there on opposite sides of the living room, closer than ever and miles apart. I didn't ask for this, Victoria whispered. No, Michael said, voice low. But you answered anyway. That night, she didn't stay. Jason kissed her goodbye with sleepy eyes and an innocent heart that didn't yet understand how complicated grown-up love could be. Michael watched her go without a word. Back in her penthouse, Victoria stood at the window, overlooking the city she used to think she ruled. And for the first time, she wondered if everything she had built was too fragile to hold the one thing she wanted most. Not control, not reputation, but belonging. Real, unconditional, messy belonging. And she didn't know how to protect it. Not from the world, and not from herself. It came in a plain white envelope with no return address. Just Michael Carter's name scrolled in stiff, lawyerly font. The moment he opened it, his breath stopped. Petition for guardianship, filed by Richard Marks, biological uncle to Jason Carter. Michael sat at the kitchen table, unmoving. As the coffee in his mug cooled, Jason was in the other room, humming along to a cartoon. Life was still normal on the surface, but Michael knew what this meant. Richard, the ghost from a past he had tried so hard to leave buried. He hadn't seen Richard in over 4 years, not since the funeral. Michael had stood at the edge of a cemetery, holding his infant son, while Lisa's brother accused him of being the reason she was gone. You weren't enough for her, Richard had spat, voice shaking with grief and fury. You'll never be enough for him. And now he was back. Victoria read the papers in silence that evening, her jaw clenched tight. I'll take care of this, she said flatly. We'll hire the best custody attorney in New York. We'll end it before it begins. Michael shook his head. It's not just legal, it's personal. He wants to hurt me. He doesn't get to win, she said, eyes burning. He looked at her. This isn't your fight, Victoria. She stepped closer. It is now. He said nothing, but the flicker in his eyes, part gratitude, part fear, spoke volumes. Richard arrived at the first hearing in a tailored gray suit, flanked by a sharp-tongued lawyer who spoke with the calculated calm of someone used to tearing families apart and charging by the hour for it. Michael wore the only suit he owned. It had once belonged to his father. It didn't fit perfectly, but it was clean. Victoria sat behind him, silent and still a force without needing to say a word. When Jason entered the room, holding his father's hand, the judge smiled faintly. Hello, Jason, the judge said. Thank you for being here today. Jason nodded solemnly, then looked up at Michael and whispered, Are we going to be okay? Michael gripped his son's hand. Always. But the courtroom was a cold place for hope. Richard's lawyer painted Michael as unstable and underemployed handyman with no college degree, no health insurance, no stable home. She hinted at emotional damage, financial recklessness, even suggesting Victoria's presence was a manipulative strategy. Then Richard stood. I only want what's best for my nephew, he said smoothly. Blood matters. Stability matters. He paused dramatically, eyes skimming the room. Your Honor, this man is struggling to survive. How can he provide a future for a child when he's barely holding on? Michael didn't speak. He didn't flinch, but his fingers curled tightly in his lap. Then Victoria rose. Her voice was clear, sharp, unapologetic. I've worked with world leaders. I've built billion-dollar companies, and I have never in my life seen anyone more committed to another human being than Michael Carter is to his son. The courtroom fell silent. He doesn't throw money at problems because he doesn't have money. He throws himself fully, without ego, without excuse, and in a world addicted to shortcuts and appearances. I'd argue that's the very definition of strength. She turned to the judge. If love matters in this court, And I hope to God it does. Then this man deserves to keep his child. The judge leaned forward, expression unreadable. Then he asked, has the child expressed any preference? Jason stood. No one told him to. No one asked. But he walked to the front of the room, chin trembling, hands clenched at his sides. My name is Jason, he said clearly, and I already have a dad. There was a sharp gasp somewhere in the back. Richard's lawyer started to object, but the judge silenced her with a glance. Jason kept going. He reads to me every night. He holds my hand when I'm scared. He doesn't have a big house or a fancy car, but he never leaves, even when he's tired, even when I'm being annoying. He turned and pointed to Michael. I pick him. Then he looked at Victoria. And I pick her, too. Not because she buys me stuff, but because she listens. His voice cracked. They make me feel safe, and you shouldn't take that away. When he finished, he walked back to Michael, climbed into his lap, and didn't say another word. The judge cleared his throat, eyes soft but firm. In light of the testimony presented and the clear emotional bond between the child and Mr. Carter, the petition for guardianship is denied. The gavel came down like thunder. Richard's shoulders sagged. His lawyer muttered something under her breath and began packing up. Michael exhaled for the first time in what felt like days. Victoria reached out and squeezed his hand. You did it, she whispered. No, he said, voice trembling. We did. Outside the courthouse, Victoria stood under the sun, watching Jason skip ahead on the sidewalk, free and unburdened. Michael looked at her. You didn't have to stand with us. Yes, I did, she said quietly. Why? Because you're the first thing in my life that's felt real in a long time. He stared at her, something shifting behind his eyes, and she added softly, and I'm tired of letting real things go. That night, as they sat at the kitchen table eating takeout from a paper bag, Jason held up a fortune cookie and read it aloud. It says, family is not who you're born to, it's who you hold on to. He looked up, grinning. I think that's about us. Michael laughed. Victoria did too, but in her chest, something steadied, settled, because the battle wasn't just for custody, it was for belief. And now, finally, she believed. They didn't celebrate with champagne. There was no party, no applause, just a quiet evening in Michael's apartment. A homemade banner that read, We did it, in Jason's handwriting, and 3 paper crowns from a dollar store. Victoria wore hers the entire night. Michael pretended to protest, but she caught the smile he tried to hide. And Jason, he acted like it was his coronation. They had won, but what they hadn't realized was that something deeper had shifted, something beyond the courtroom. Victoria came by more frequently now, not as a guest, not as an outsider, but as if she belonged. She'd bring soup when Michael worked late, stay for bedtime stories, sit through cartoons she pretended not to enjoy. Her heels sat by the front door now, next to Michael's worn boots and Jason's light-up sneakers. You should just move in, Jason said one night as she tucked him in. Victoria blinked. That's a big suggestion, he shrugged. You're here all the time. You make Dad smile more. And you don't burn the grilled cheese like he does? She laughed. Well, that's quite the resume. He looked at her, small and serious. People leave, but you didn't. That's why I think you're already kind of our family. Victoria sat there, her heart thudding quietly, the weight of his words heavier than anything she'd negotiated in a boardroom. She brushed his hair back and whispered, Thank you for picking me. The next day, Victoria made a decision she never thought she would. She called a meeting with the board of her company. You all know who I am, she began. You know what I've built, but I've realized something. What we build means nothing if we're too afraid to live inside it. She paused, scanning the room of suits in silence. I'm stepping back from daily operations. Murmurs rippled through the room like a wave. I'll remain chairwoman, but the day-to-day will be managed by the people I trust. I'm starting something new, a foundation, one focused on second chances for families who've been overlooked. Someone tried to interrupt. "I'm not asking for permission," she said, calm and firm. "This isn't a retreat. It's a return to the kind of life I want." And with that, she walked out. The building didn't collapse. The empire didn't crumble. The world kept turning. But Victoria Morgan, for the first time, felt like she was finally facing the right direction. That weekend, Michael planned something special. A dinner not fancy, not expensive, just thoughtful. He set the table with 3 mismatched plates, made roasted chicken with help from a YouTube chef who talked too fast, lit candles that smelled vaguely of cinnamon. When Victoria walked in, she paused at the doorway. Michael stood in the kitchen, wearing an apron that said official taste tester. He held up a spoon. "Don't judge. It's probably overcooked." She walked to him slowly, her gaze soft. "It's perfect," she said. And she wasn't talking about the food. They sat down, the 3 of them, laughter echoing through the tiny apartment as if it had more square footage than it knew what to do with. Halfway through dinner, Jason jumped up and ran to his backpack. "I made something," he declared. He returned holding a folded piece of paper, edges wrinkled and covered in crayon. He laid it on the table. On the page were 3 stick figures, one tall with a crown, one medium with a beard, one tiny with a cape. Above them, in shaky letters, "Me, Daddy, and my family." Beneath that, smaller words, "Forever, not just for a day." Victoria's breath caught. Michael looked at her. "I think he knows," he said softly. She nodded, her voice thin. "So do I." Later that night, as Michael walked her to her car, the air was cool, the sky above them clear. "I never thought I'd have this," he said. "Not again." She looked up at him. "Why didn't you ever ask for more?" He exhaled slowly. "Because I didn't think I deserved more." She stepped closer. "You do. You always did." He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "What about you? Did you ever think you'd let someone in?" She smiled, eyes glassy. "Only when I stopped being afraid of what it would cost." They stood there in the stillness, the city buzzing somewhere far away, 2 souls quietly choosing each other. The next morning, Jason ran out the front door, holding a small envelope with a red heart sticker. "I want to mail it to the foundation," he yelled. Michael raised an eyebrow. "Mail what?" Jason grinned. "My first donation." Inside was a dollar bill and 2 quarters for the next kid who needs a family. He said, "Like I did." Victoria knelt beside him, tears threatening to spill. "Jason," she whispered, "you didn't just find a family. You helped build one." He wrapped his arms around her. "I love you, Miss Victoria." She held him tighter. "You can drop the miss," she said, her voice breaking. And in that moment, the world felt impossibly wide and beautifully small all at once. The restaurant was small, tucked between 2 brownstones in a quiet corner of the city. From the outside, it didn't look like much, just a single flickering lantern above a weathered wooden door and windows fogged with warmth. But inside, the space had been transformed. Fairy lights traced the ceiling beams. A small round table sat in the center of the room, set for 3, white linen, soft candles, and plates that gleamed in the candlelight. On each, a handwritten place card. Michael, Jason, Victoria. Michael adjusted the cuffs of his one good dress shirt, shifting nervously in the doorway. Victoria stood beside him, radiant in a dark green dress, not because it shimmered, but because she didn't try to hide in it. Her hair was pulled back loosely, a hint of rose on her cheeks. "You didn't have to do all this," she said quietly. Michael looked at her. "I didn't want just another night. I wanted one we'd remember." She smiled. "You're getting good at this." "Dinner," he smirked. "Showing up," she said. Jason ran ahead, gasping when he saw the cupcakes on the dessert tray. "Do they have the kind with crunchy stuff on top?" he asked the server. Eyes wide. "They do now," Michael said with a wink. Jason laughed so hard he knocked over his water glass, and Victoria caught it mid-tip. "Still got it," she said, raising a brow at Michael. He chuckled. "You always did." As they sat, the conversation flowed the way it only could between people who had already lived through the hard parts. They didn't talk about the courtroom or the press or the foundation that Victoria had just opened last week. They talked about Jason's latest school project, dinosaurs, the strange noise the sink was making again, and whether or not pineapple belonged on pizza. It absolutely does, Jason insisted, waving his fork for emphasis. Michael shook his head. That's sacrilege. Victoria leaned in, stage whispering to Jason. You're outnumbered, but morally correct. Jason grinned like he'd just won a debate on national television. As the main course cleared, Victoria reached into her handbag and pulled out a small, elegant box wrapped in silver paper. I have something for you, she said, sliding it across to Jason. For me, he gasped. Michael leaned forward, curious. Victoria simply nodded. Jason opened it slowly, as if afraid to ruin the wrapping. Inside was a delicate silver necklace, small and simple. A circular charm hung from the center, engraved with one word, family. He turned it over. On the back, forever. His hands trembled. It's for me. Victoria's voice softened. You taught me what that word really means. I wanted you to have something that reminds you that no matter what happens, you'll always have a place with me. Jason stood up, climbed into her lap without hesitation, and wrapped his arms tightly around her neck. You're my forever too. Michael watched, something raw and wordless flickering in his eyes. Later, when the dishes had been cleared and Jason was half asleep in his seat, Victoria reached into her coat and pulled out a second box. This one's smaller. She stood. Michael, she said softly, I don't know how to do this the way others do. I've never written love songs. I don't bake. I barely know how to make coffee. He stood slowly, heart thumping. But you showed me that love isn't about grand gestures or perfection. It's about presence, about showing up when it's messy and loud and inconvenient, about choosing each other, again and again. She opened the box. Inside was a simple ring, a single stone, no glitter, no pretense, just something real. I don't want temporary. I don't want convenient. I want real. I want us, if you'll have me. For a long moment, Michael said nothing. Then he stepped forward, cupped her face in both hands, and whispered, I already do. They kissed, and somewhere between candlelight and tears, time stood still. Jason, who had roused just enough to witness the moment, leapt up and shouted, Can I be the flower boy? Michael laughed, pulling him into a hug. You're going to be more than that, buddy. That night, Michael walked Victoria to her car. The air was crisp, and the street was quiet. You've changed everything, he said softly. She looked at him. No, you did. They stood there for a beat, hands intertwined, the world around them fading. And then Michael asked the question he hadn't dared before. What if we really could have all of it? Victoria smiled. Then let's build it, somewhere not far away. A child in a shelter held a flyer from the New Beginnings Foundation, a new name in a world that rarely offered new beginnings. A name that promised not charity, but dignity, not pity, but possibility. And one day soon, they too would find a family, not the one they were born into, but the one who chose them, just like Michael, just like Victoria, just like Jason. Kriterian. They didn't announce it with headlines. No press releases, no viral posts. But those who knew them, really knew them, could feel the shift. Something in Victoria's voice had softened. Something in Michael's step had steadied. And Jason had started drawing four-person families in school. He'd added a dog and a backyard. It began like most real things do, not with a grand moment, but with a quiet decision. One morning, Victoria stood in front of the mirror, holding a box. Inside was the ring Michael had placed on her finger weeks ago, still glowing with promise, still heavy with meaning, but beside it now lay a new key. To a home they hadn't built yet, a life they hadn't lived yet, but one they were choosing, brick by brick. She smiled, closed the box. and turned toward her future. Their wedding was nothing like the society pages imagined it would be. No cathedral, no orchestra, no guest list of CEOs and senators. Just a garden behind their new home, modest, sunlit, and blooming with white roses that Jason insisted on picking himself. Michael stood under a wooden arch he had built with his own hands. His suit wasn't expensive, but it was clean and pressed, and he'd worn the tie Jason picked out a slightly crooked clip-on with cartoon rockets. Victoria walked toward him in a simple ivory dress. No diamonds, no veil, just a single yellow flower tucked behind her ear. Jason's doing. Again, when she reached him, Michael whispered, "You look like peace." She smiled. "And you look like home." They didn't read rehearsed vows. They didn't need to. Michael took her hands, his voice rough with emotion. "I spent so long thinking love was about sacrifice, about holding everything and proving I could survive. But then you walked into our lives and showed me that love isn't about enduring. It's about healing. It's about choosing." Victoria's eyes shimmered. "I thought building empires would protect me," she said. That if I was powerful enough, nothing could hurt me. But you undid all of that with kindness, with presence. You made room in your world for a woman who didn't even know how to belong." Jason stood beside them, bouncing slightly with excitement, holding the rings in a velvet box he'd almost dropped twice. "Can I say my part now?" he whispered. Not so quietly. Everyone laughed. Michael nodded. Jason cleared his throat, trying to sound older than 6. "I just want to say I picked both of you first. Before the rings, before the dress, before the cupcakes. I picked you because you make each other better, and you make me feel like the luckiest kid in the world." There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. Victoria leaned down and kissed Jason's forehead. "You're the reason we're here." Michael slipped the ring onto Victoria's finger, and she did the same. The officiant didn't need to ask. The I do was in the way they looked at each other in the silence that held the weight of everything they'd already lived through, and everything still to come. After the ceremony, they danced barefoot in the grass. No music, just laughter. Jason twirled Victoria until they both fell down. Dizzy, Michael kissed her like the world wasn't watching, and maybe, for once, it wasn't. Later that evening, after guests had left and candles burned low, Michael stood in the doorway of their new home, looking out at the stars. Victoria wrapped her arms around him from behind. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. He smiled without turning. "That I used to be afraid of falling, and now I know I've already landed." She stepped beside him. "We built this, didn't we?" He nodded. "And we get to keep building." Inside, Jason had fallen asleep on the couch, still wearing his little bow tie, arms wrapped around a stuffed dog Victoria had given him with a tag that read, "For all your adventures." Michael covered him with a blanket, then turned to Victoria. "He's everything." "So are you." He tilted his head. "And you?" She leaned into him. "I'm home." That night, the house was quiet but full of dreams and warmth and new beginnings, the kind that don't need to be announced, only lived in bedtime stories, in burnt pancakes, in shared silence and unexpected laughter. This wasn't the ending. This was the life they had all stopped daring to wish for, and now finally had the courage to claim. It happened slowly, like spring slipping into a long frozen room. There was no dramatic fanfare, no cinematic swell, just warmth, gradual, steady, and real. They never circled a date on the calendar that marked when they became a family. There was no specific moment that said, "Here, this is when everything changed." Because the truth was, it changed quietly, in pieces, in the way Jason began to call her mom without hesitation, as if the word had simply been waiting for the right voice, in how Victoria instinctively packed 2 extra granola bars in her bag, one for Michael, one for the boy who had once only asked her to pretend, and in the way Michael, for the first time in years, began to hum while making coffee, like a man who had nothing to prove and everything to look forward to. Life wasn't perfect. Their sink still leaked. Jason still insisted on wearing mismatched socks. Michael still burned toast. Victoria still checked her email more often than she should. But now they were woven together in the smallest ways. In the shared toothbrush cup, in the coats hung side by the door, in the way Michael reached for Victoria's hand when she wasn't looking, and she always held on. One Saturday morning, Victoria stood at the kitchen counter, her hair messy, wearing Michael's oversized hoodie, reading a sticky note from Jason that said, "Don't forget parents' show and tell today. Bring something cool." She looked at Michael, who was feeding their rescue dog, aptly named Chance, and said, "I don't think a balance sheet will impress a room of first graders." He grinned. "You could show them how to buy a company. Or I could show them how to make homemade slime," she said with mock horror, pulling out a small jar from the fridge. Jason said, "It's your greatest achievement." "It is," Michael said solemnly. "My legacy." They laughed. It was the kind of laugh that stays with you, deep, familiar, and without defense. At school, Jason stood tall in front of his class, a shy but proud smile on his face. "These are my parents," he said, pointing to Michael and Victoria. "And this," he held up the jar of blue, "glittery goo is their slime. They made it together and only fought a little." The room erupted in laughter. Even Victoria couldn't help herself. Jason continued, voice softer now but sure. "They told me, family means you choose each other every day. So I picked them, and they picked me back on the drive home." Michael reached across the console, linked his fingers with Victoria's, and said, "You know, I used to think I had to survive alone. That love was for other people." Victoria glanced at him. "What changed?" "You did." She squeezed his hand. "No, Michael, we did. Together." In the months that followed, life unfolded gently. The New Beginnings Foundation grew into something bigger than they imagined, not just a nonprofit, but a lifeline. They helped single parents find stable housing, funded scholarships for kids who had been overlooked, and built a community around the belief that no one should be punished for starting over. At the grand opening of their new community center, Jason stood with a ribbon in one hand and a pair of giant scissors in the other. "Are you ready?" Victoria whispered. Jason looked up at her, beaming. "Let's do it." He cut the ribbon, and the crowd cheered. But more than that, more than the applause and the photos, was the look in Michael's eyes as he pulled them both into a hug. That look said, "We made this. From nothing. From broken pieces. From hope. And it was enough. More than enough." One evening, under the golden haze of a fading sunset, Victoria sat on their front steps, watching Michael and Jason race down the block, with Chance barking wildly behind them. She sipped her tea slowly, letting the silence stretch. Comfortable now. Not lonely. Michael jogged back, panting. "Jason beat me," he said, breathless. "He's got your stubbornness and my need to win," Victoria replied, grinning. "We're doomed." Michael plopped down beside her. "You ever think about how this all started? A coffee shop, a cashier, a little boy with a very big question." Michael looked at her, the softness in his eyes almost too much to bear. "That one question changed my life." "Mine too." They sat there for a while, shoulder to shoulder, watching the boy they loved more than life itself chase after stars only he could see. That night, as they tucked Jason into bed, he looked up at them sleepily. "Thanks for staying," he murmured. Victoria leaned down, kissed his forehead. "Always," Michael whispered, "even when the slime explodes." Jason giggled, already halfway to dreams. Outside, the sky was endless. Inside, a family rested, whole, safe, and chosen. Because love, when real, doesn't always arrive loud. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it knocks once, waits patiently, and asks only one thing. Would you stay? And when you do, when you choose to stay, not just for a day, but for a lifetime, you find the kind of forever that no storm, no silence, and no past can ever take away. Because in the end, family isn't who you're born to. It's who you become for each other. And maybe that's what love truly is. Not the grand gestures, but the quiet moments, the choice to stay, the courage to begin again, and the grace to build something beautiful together. Victoria's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the email on her screen. Urgent potential acquisition of New Beginnings Foundation conference call 3 p.m. The New Beginnings Foundation had grown beyond their wildest expectations over the past year. What had started as a small passion project focused on helping single-parent families had blossomed into a nationally recognized organization with community centers in 3 boroughs, scholarship programs, housing assistance, and a revolutionary co-parenting support network. And now, someone wanted to buy it, turn it into part of a larger charity conglomerate, streamline it, optimize it. Victoria closed her laptop with more force than necessary. Bad news, Michael asked, looking up from where he was making sandwiches for lunch. It was Saturday, and Jason was in the backyard trying to teach Chance a new trick. Someone wants to acquire the foundation, she said. Michael raised an eyebrow. Isn't that a good thing? More resources, bigger reach. She shook her head. Not this group. I know their model. They'll strip it down, keep the parts that look good on annual reports, and discard the rest. All the personal touches, the things that actually matter, gone. He wiped his hands on a dish towel and came around the counter. So say no. It's not that simple. There's a board now. Donors. Partners. Since when has Victoria Morgan ever done what's simple? He placed his hands on her shoulders. This foundation exists because you refuse to let someone else define what your life could be. Don't let them start now. She leaned into him, drawing strength from his steady presence. When did you get so wise? About the time I let a billionaire CEO into my apartment for dinner. He grinned. Best decision I ever made. Victoria looked out the window at Jason, who was now doing cartwheels while Chance ran circles around him. I can't let this happen. New Beginnings isn't just an organization. It's our story. Then fight for it, she nodded, determination replacing uncertainty. I will. 3 days later, Victoria stood in a conference room at the Foundation's headquarters, facing down a panel of board members and the CEO of Comprehensive Charity Network. Bernard Whitaker. Ms. Ronald Morgan, Whitaker began, his voice smooth as polished marble. I understand your hesitation, but look at the numbers. He slid a folder across the table. We can expand New Beginnings to 15 cities within 2 years. Think of the families you could help. Victoria didn't touch the folder. Numbers don't tell the whole story, Mr. Whitaker. In my experience, they tell the only story that matters. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Then your experience has been tragically limited. The room tensed. Board members shifted uncomfortably. Let me be clear, Victoria continued. New Beginnings works because we know every family by name, because we understand that helping people isn't about efficiency. It's about dignity. Your model would gut that philosophy. Whitaker leaned back, a hint of condescension in his posture. Noble sentiments, Ms. Morgan, but sentiment doesn't scale. Actually, it does. Victoria pressed a button on the remote, and the screen behind her lit up with photographs. Families standing in front of new homes, children holding scholarship certificates, single parents graduating from vocational programs. These aren't data points, Mr. Whitaker. These are lives, and behind each of these lives is a story of someone who was seen, not just served. She moved through the presentation with precision, presenting not just outcomes but transformations, not just numbers but narratives. The Rodriguez family, Pedro, works 2 jobs while raising 3 children. Our center provides after-school care that doesn't just babysit his kids but helps them thrive. Would your streamlined model preserve that? Whitaker didn't answer. The Chen sisters, both widowed, both over 65. They co-parent their grandchildren with our support. Is there a checkbox for that in your assessment metrics? By the time she finished, the energy in the room had shifted. Board members were sitting straighter, eyes brighter. I founded New Beginnings because I believe in second chances, Victoria said, her voice steady. not just for the families we serve, but for how we serve them. Your offer would undo that vision. So my answer is no. The meeting ended shortly after. As the board members filed out, many stopped to shake Victoria's hand. Even Whitaker gave her a grudging nod of respect. That was quite a performance, he said. You've clearly found your calling. It wasn't a performance, she replied. It was a reminder. That evening, as Victoria recounted the meeting to Michael, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. You know what was strange, she said, curled beside him on the couch. 10 years ago, I would have taken that deal in a heartbeat. Bigger, faster, more impressive on paper. I wouldn't have even questioned it. Michael traced lazy patterns on her arm. And now I understand that the most valuable things can't be measured. They can only be felt. She looked toward Jason's room, where a nightlight cast star patterns on the ceiling. I have a different definition of success now. He kissed her temple. I'm proud of you. For saying no to millions of dollars. She laughed softly. For knowing your yes is worth more. The invitation arrived in an elegant cream envelope. The Morgan Financial Group logo embossed in silver on the front. Annual Gala and Founders Award Ceremony. It read, Honoring 50 Years of Excellence. Michael held it up at breakfast. Fancy. Victoria barely glanced at it. I'm not going. Why not? It's your company's anniversary. Was my company, she corrected. I'm just chairwoman now. Besides, those events are exhausting. Fake smiles, empty conversations, everyone trying to prove they belong in the room. Jason looked up from his cereal. Can I go? I've never been to a gala. Victoria hesitated. It's not really a kid-friendly event. Honey, we could make it kid-friendly, Michael suggested. Show those stuffy financiers what they're missing. She narrowed her eyes at him. You just want to see me in a gown. He grinned. That's definitely a bonus. Later, after Jason had gone to school, Michael brought it up again. You should go, Victoria, not for them, but for you, to remember where you came from. She was about to argue when her phone buzzed with a text from Emma, her former assistant and now COO of Morgan Financial. Please come to the gala. There's something important happening. Trust me. Victoria stared at the message, then showed it to Michael. Emma doesn't exaggerate, she said. If she says it's important, Michael nodded. Then we go. The night of the gala, Victoria stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the neckline of her emerald green gown. It was simpler than what she would have worn in her CEO days, no dramatic train. No excessive beading, just elegant lines in a color that made her eyes look like polished jade. Wow, Michael said from the doorway. In his tuxedo rented, but perfectly tailored, he looked like he belonged on a movie screen. You are breathtaking, she turned, taking in the sight of him. You clean up pretty nicely yourself. Dad looks like a spy. Jason called from behind him, dressed in his own miniature tuxedo. And Mom looks like a princess. Victoria's heart still skipped whenever Jason called her Mom. It had been 9 months since he'd started, but the wonder of it hadn't faded. A very businesslike princess, she corrected, kneeling to straighten his bow tie. The best kind, he declared. The Morgan Financial Group Gala was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, transformed for the evening into a glittering homage to 5 decades of financial excellence. As their car pulled up to the entrance, Victoria felt a flutter of anxiety. It's been a while since I've done this, she admitted. Michael squeezed her hand. Just remember, we get to go home together after. Those simple words steadied her. The moment they stepped into the grand hall, heads turned. Victoria Morgan, the woman who had walked away from daily leadership of one of the most successful financial groups in the country to start a family foundation, was back. With her family in tow, Emma rushed over, elegant in a navy blue gown. You came, she exclaimed, hugging Victoria tightly. Then she knelt to Jason's level. And you must be the famous Jason I've heard so much about. He nodded solemnly. Are you the boss now? Emma laughed. One of them. Your mom taught me everything I know. Not everything. Victoria corrected with a smile. As they moved through the crowd, Victoria introduced Michael and Jason to former colleagues, board members, and industry leaders. Some conversations were warm, others stilted, but what surprised her most was how little she cared about impressing any of them. "Victoria Morgan," a voice called. She turned to see Bernard Whitaker, the same man who had tried to acquire New Beginnings. "I didn't expect to see you here, Mr. Whitaker," she replied coolly. "I could say the same. I go where opportunity leads." His gaze flicked to Michael and Jason. "I see you brought your situation." Michael's posture stiffened, but before he could respond, Jason stepped forward. "I'm Jason," he said, extending his hand with perfect composure. "It's nice to meet you, sir. Are you one of Mom's friends?" The simplicity of the question, the innocence seemed to disarm Whitaker. He awkwardly shook the small hand offered to him. "We're acquaintances," he managed. "Oh," Jason nodded. "That's okay. Not everyone gets to be friends. That takes time." Victoria had to bite her lip to keep from laughing at Whitaker's expression, a mixture of confusion and begrudging respect. "Well said, young man," he finally replied. "Perhaps your mother's instincts were sharper than I gave her credit for." As he walked away, Michael whispered, "Did our 6-year-old just diplomatically shut down a corporate shark? Like mother, like son," Victoria said proudly. The evening progressed with dinner, speeches, and awards. Victoria was content to remain in the background, catching up with old colleagues and watching Jason charm everyone who spoke to him. Then Emma took the stage for the final presentation. "Tonight, we honor 50 years of Morgan Financial Group," she began. "But more importantly, we honor the legacy of vision, integrity, and transformation that has defined us." The lights dimmed, and a video began playing. It showed the company's evolution through 5 decades, from its founding by Victoria's mentor, Harold Morgan, to its current global reach. Harold believed that financial institutions had a responsibility not just to create wealth, but to create opportunity. Emma continued as the video ended. "That spirit guided MFG for 30 years under his leadership, and for 15 remarkable years under the leadership of the woman he chose as his successor." Victoria tensed. This wasn't on the program. Victoria Morgan took a successful regional firm and transformed it into a global powerhouse. But what many don't know is how she transformed it from within. The screen switched to interviews employees Victoria had mentored, community programs she had quietly funded, ethical initiatives she had championed that had changed industry standards. Under Victoria's leadership, MFG became the first major financial group to achieve pay equity across gender and racial lines, the first to offer comprehensive parental leave to all employees, the first to divest from environmentally destructive industries, even when it meant short-term profit loss. Victoria felt Michael's hand find hers, squeezing gently. "And now," Emma continued, "Victoria Morgan is transforming something even more important, the way we think about success itself." The screen showed images of New Beginnings families being helped, communities being rebuilt, lives being changed. "Tonight, it is my honor to present the Harold Morgan Founders Award not to a financial innovation, not to a market strategy, but to a person who embodies the true spirit of what Harold built, a vision that extends beyond balance sheets to the balance of life itself." Emma turned toward their table. "Victoria Morgan, would you please join me on stage?" The room erupted in applause. Victoria sat frozen, stunned. Jason tugged at her hand. "Mom, they're clapping for you," he whispered loudly. Michael gently nudged her. "Go on." She rose, moved to the stage in a daze. Emma handed her a crystal award, its facets catching the light like captured stars. "I don't have a speech prepared," Victoria said, her voice soft but caring. "Then speak from the heart," Emma urged quietly. Victoria looked out at the crowd faces she had worked with, competed against, led, and sometimes feared. Then her eyes found Michael and Jason, watching her with unabashed pride. 15 years ago, Harold Morgan took a chance on a woman who was all ambition and sharp edges. She began. He told me something I didn't understand then. He said, Victoria, you'll know you've succeeded when the balance sheet becomes the least interesting part of your day. She smiled at the memory. I thought he was losing his touch. After all, isn't finance all about the numbers? A ripple of knowing laughter moved through the crowd. What I've learned, what I'm still learning, is that the numbers are just symbols for something deeper. They represent trust, potential, dreams. The real work isn't growing wealth, it's growing well-being. Not just for clients or shareholders, but for each other, for our communities, for ourselves. Her gaze returned to Michael and Jason. A year ago, a little boy asked me to be his mommy for a day. It was supposed to be temporary, a favor, but that day changed everything. It reminded me that the most valuable investments aren't the ones that yield the highest return. They're the ones that yield the deepest meaning. Victoria held up the award. I accept this honor not as a capstone to a career, but as a milestone in a journey that continues to surprise me. And I share it with the two people who taught me that the true measure of success isn't what you accumulate, but what you give away. As she stepped down from the stage, the applause was thunderous, but Victoria barely heard it. Her focus was entirely on reaching the table where her family waited. Jason jumped up the moment she returned, throwing his arms around her waist. That was awesome, he exclaimed. Did you know they were going to do that? Not a clue, she laughed, still dazed. Michael stood, pulling both of them into an embrace. Harold Morgan was right, he murmured against her hair. You are extraordinary. For the rest of the evening, Victoria moved through the crowd with a lightness she hadn't felt in years. The weight of proving herself, of maintaining an image, had lifted. She wasn't Victoria Morgan, CEO. She was just Victoria Mother, partner, person, and somehow, that felt like the biggest success of all. The news broke on a Tuesday morning in early spring. Financial titan Richard Marx indicted on fraud charges. Michael stared at the headline on his phone, color draining from his face. Victoria, pouring coffee in the kitchen, noticed immediately. What is it? She asked. He handed her the phone wordlessly. The article detailed a massive fraud scheme involving Richard Marx, Jason's uncle and the man who had tried to take him away from Michael. Marx had allegedly been misappropriating client funds for years, using the money to maintain the illusion of wealth and success. Do you think this is why he suddenly wanted custody of Jason? Victoria asked quietly, ensuring Jason couldn't hear them from where he was getting ready for school. Michael nodded grimly. Lisa's life insurance policy. It was put in a trust for Jason. With me as trustee, Richard couldn't touch it unless he had custody. He would have used his own nephew's future to cover his crimes, Victoria said, disgust evident in her voice. I always knew he resented me, Michael sighed, but I never thought he'd go this far. They decided not to tell Jason immediately. At 7 years old, he had finally settled into a sense of security and belonging. The last thing they wanted was to reopen old wounds. But as with most secrets in the age of social media, it didn't stay hidden for long. That afternoon, Jason came home from school with shadowed eyes and slumped shoulders. What's wrong, buddy? Michael asked, kneeling to meet his son's gaze. Tommy said my uncle is a bad guy who steals money, Jason said, voice small. Is that true? Is that why he wanted to take me away from you? Victoria and Michael exchanged a look of dismay. Then Victoria sat on the floor, patting the space beside her. Come here, sweetheart. Let's talk about this. Jason settled between them, and Michael took a deep breath. Your Uncle Richard made some bad choices, he began carefully. And yes, one of those choices was trying to take you away from us. But that doesn't mean you're connected to any of the bad things he did. But he's my mom's brother, Jason said, confusion clouding his features. Does that make me bad too? Victoria's heart clenched. Absolutely not, she said firmly. Listen to me. Jason, the actions of other people, even people who are related to us, don't define who we are. You get to decide that for yourself. Every single day. How, he asked. By the choices you make, Michael explained. By how you treat others. By whether you choose kindness or cruelty. Honesty or lies? Your uncle made his choices, Victoria added, but you're making yours. And from where I sit, you're making beautiful ones. Jason seemed to consider this, his small face scrunched in thought. Is Uncle Richard going to jail? Michael nodded. Probably, yes. Will I have to see him? Not unless you want to, Victoria assured him, and not for a very long time. In any case, Jason was quiet for a moment. Then he asked the question they hadn't anticipated. What about my other mom? Was she like him? Michael's breath caught. He had always talked about Lisa with Jason, keeping her memory alive through stories and photographs. But this was new territory. No, he said softly but firmly. Your mom, Lisa, was nothing like Richard. She was kind and brave, and loved you more than anything in the world. She would be so proud of you, Victoria added, and she would be grateful that you have people who love you as much as we do. Jason nodded, seeming satisfied with their answers. But later that night, after he had gone to bed, Victoria found Michael sitting alone in the dark living room. He's never asked about Lisa like that before, Michael said, voice rough with emotion, like he was afraid of who she might have been. Victoria sat beside him, taking his hand. It's natural for him to wonder, especially after learning something unsettling about her family. I've tried so hard to keep her memory positive for him. And you have, she assured him. But Jason is growing up. He's going to have questions, complicated ones. All we can do is answer them honestly and make sure he knows that he is loved both by us and by the memory of Lisa. Michael leaned into her. I never expected this path to be easy, but sometimes it feels like navigating a minefield. Victoria finished for him. Exactly. Well, she said, pulling him closer. Good thing we're not walking it alone. The following weekend, they took Jason to the cemetery where Lisa was buried. It wasn't their first visit. Michael had made a point of bringing Jason on Lisa's birthday and Mother's Day each year, but this time felt different. Victoria hung back as Michael and Jason approached the grave, giving them space for this moment that belonged to their shared history. But to her surprise, Jason turned and waved her forward. Come on, Mom, he called. I want you to meet my other mom. Tears pricked at her eyes as she joined them by the simple headstone. Hi, Lisa, Jason said to the grave. This is Victoria. She's my mom now, too. Dad says you like her because she doesn't let him get away with stuff either. Michael chuckled wetly at that. I brought both my parents today, Jason continued, because I wanted to ask you something. He placed a small, smooth stone on top of the headstone, a tradition Michael had started with him years ago. Uncle Richard did some bad things, he said seriously, but Dad says that doesn't change who I am. He says I get to choose. So I'm choosing to be like you and Dad and Victoria. I'm choosing to be good. Victoria felt Michael's hand find hers, squeezing tightly. Is that okay? Jason asked the silent stone. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the maple tree shading the grave, sending dappled sunlight dancing across the ground. I think she's saying yes, Michael whispered. Jason smiled, satisfied. Good, because I already decided. As they walked back to the car, Jason between them holding both their hands, Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a chance encounter in a coffee shop to this moment of shared grief and hope and love, none of it had been easy. All of it had been worth it. The envelope arrived on a rainy Thursday, bearing the embossed seal of the state of New York. Victoria recognized it immediately. They had been waiting for this moment for months. Michael, she called, her voice vibrating with barely contained excitement. It's here. He came running from the backyard, where he'd been fixing a loose board on the fence. Jason followed, curious about the commotion. Is that it? Michael asked, his eyes fixed on the envelope in her hands. Victoria nodded, suddenly unable to speak past the lump in her throat. What is it? Jason asked, looking between his parents. Michael knelt down to his level. Remember how we talked about making our family official in every way? This might be the papers that let us do that. Jason's eyes widened. You mean so Mom is really my mom? Like, for real and not just because we say so? That's right, Victoria managed, her voice thick with emotion. "But you know what, you made me your mom long before any paper said so. But the paper makes it so nobody can ever say you're not," Jason said with the simple clarity of a child who had once faced the threat of separation. "Exactly," Michael agreed. "Want to open it together?" The three of them gathered at the kitchen table. Victoria carefully slit the envelope open and pulled out the official documents. "Petition for adoption, Victoria Morgan, re Jason Carter," she read aloud. "Court date June 15th. Michael let out a whoop of joy and swept Jason up into his arms, spinning him around the kitchen. "We got a date," he exclaimed. "Just 6 weeks away." Victoria clutched the papers to her chest. Overcome. This was it, the final piece that would legally bind together the family they had already built with love. "Does this mean I get to be Jason Morgan Carter?" Jason asked, his face alight with excitement. "If that's what you want," Victoria said, "or you could keep your name just as it is." Jason considered this seriously. "I want both," he decided. "Because I'm both. I'm who I was, and I'm who I am now." Michael set him down gently. "That's pretty wise for a 7-year-old. "Almost 8, Jason corrected, holding up 7 fingers and then quickly adding another. "Almost 8, Victoria agreed, laughing through her tears. That night, after Jason had gone to bed, Victoria and Michael sat on the back porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. "It doesn't change anything," Michael said softly. "And it changes everything." Victoria nodded, understanding perfectly. "I keep thinking about that day in the coffee shop, how close I came to just walking away." "But you didn't." "No," she smiled. "I didn't. And now here we are, about to make official what our hearts have known for a long time." Michael wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You know what I'm most grateful for?" "What?" "That Jason knew what he needed before either of us did. That he was brave enough to ask for it." Victoria leaned into him. "From the mouths of babes." The weeks leading up to the adoption hearing flew by in a blur of preparations. There were forms to complete, home visits to arrange, letters of recommendation to collect. Victoria threw herself into the process with the same focus and determination she had once directed at corporate acquisitions. "You know," Emma remarked during a lunch date, "I've seen you prepare for billion-dollar deals with less intensity." Victoria smiled ruefully. Those deals never mattered this much. The night before the hearing, Victoria couldn't sleep. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Michael, and padded downstairs to the kitchen. To her surprise, a small light was already on. Jason sat at the counter, a glass of milk and a half-eaten cookie in front of him. "Couldn't sleep either, huh?" Victoria asked, sliding onto the stool beside him. He shook his head. "I'm too excited and a little scared." Scared, why? He fidgeted with his cookie. "What if the judge says no?" Victoria's heart squeezed. Despite all their reassurances, Jason still carried the memory of that courtroom where his future had once hung in the balance. "The judge won't say no," she said gently. "All the paperwork is in order. The home study went perfectly, and most importantly, we all want this you, me, and your dad. But what if something goes wrong?" he persisted. "What if they find out about the time I didn't turn in my homework, or when I fed my broccoli to Chance?" A smile tugged at Victoria's lips. "Oh, sweetheart, the judge isn't looking for perfect children or perfect parents. They're looking for love, for commitment, for a family that chooses each other. Flaws and all." Jason seemed to consider this. "So even though I sometimes don't clean my room, even then, and even though you sometimes burn the pancakes," Victoria laughed, "even then, and even though Dad still can't figure out how to fold the laundry right?" "Especially then," she said, pulling him into a hug, "because that's what makes us real." Jason nodded against her shoulder. "I like being real with you." "Me too, buddy, me too." The morning of the adoption arrived bright and clear, as if the universe itself was celebrating with them. They dressed in their best clothes, Jason in a smart blue suit that matched Michael's, Victoria in a simple ivory dress, as they drove to the courthouse. Jason bounced in his seat, his earlier fears seemingly forgotten in the excitement of the day. The courtroom was different from the one where they had fought Richard's custody petition. Smaller, warmer somehow. Their lawyer, a kind woman named Sophia who specialized in adoptions, met them at the door. "Everything is in order," she assured them. "This is going to be a happy day." And it was. The judge, an older woman with silver hair and bright eyes, made the proceedings feel more like a celebration than a legal formality. She asked Jason questions about school, about his hobbies, about what he liked to do with his family. "And what would you like to happen today?" she asked him. Jason stood straight, his voice clear. "I want Victoria to be my mom for real, not just for a day, but forever." The judge smiled. "That's a very big wish." "I know," Jason nodded seriously. "But I've been wishing it for a long time." Victoria felt tears spill down her cheeks, unable to contain the emotion that welled up at his words. The judge turned to her. "Miss Morgan, do you understand that by adopting Jason, you are accepting all the rights, responsibilities, and joys of being his parent, legally and permanently?" "I do," Victoria said, her voice steady despite her tears. "He has been my son in my heart from the moment he asked me to be his mother. Today just makes it official to the rest of the world." The judge nodded, satisfied. "And Mr. Carter, do you consent to this adoption, understanding that you will share legal parenthood of your son?" Michael's voice was thick with emotion. "With all my heart, Your Honor." The judge signed the decree with a flourish. "Then by the power vested in me by the state of New York, I hereby declare this adoption final and complete. Congratulations to the Morgan Carter family." Jason let out a whoop and launched himself at Victoria, who caught him in a tight embrace. Michael joined them, wrapping his arms around them both. "We did it," Victoria whispered against Jason's hair. "You're officially stuck with me now." "Promise?" Jason asked, his face glowing with joy. "Promise," she and Michael said in unison, as they left the courthouse, stepping into the June sunshine as a legally recognized family. Victoria was struck by how far they had come. From strangers in a coffee shop to this moment of profound connection, there had been challenges: Richard's custody battle, the scrutiny of the press, the balancing of careers and family, the integration of different lives into one shared story. There would be more challenges ahead. She knew. Life didn't stop testing you just because you found happiness. But standing there with Michael's hand in hers and Jason skipping ahead, talking excitedly about the celebration dinner they had planned, Victoria knew they would face whatever came next together. Because family wasn't about perfect circumstances or smooth sailing. It was about choosing each other, day after day. It was about showing up, especially when it was hard. It was about a little boy brave enough to ask a stranger to be his mommy for a day, and a woman brave enough to say yes. And it was about a man who had the courage to open his heart again, to trust that love was worth the risk. Together, they had built something beautiful from brokenness, something real, something lasting, not just for a day, but forever. 10 years later, Victoria sat in the audience of Westwood Middle School's auditorium, watching as 15-year-old Jason stood at the podium, delivering his speech for the 8th grade graduation ceremony. "When I was 6 years old," he began, his voice deeper now but still carrying that same clear sincerity, "I walked up to a stranger in a coffee shop and asked her to be my mom for a day." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Most had heard versions of this story over the years. It had become something of a legend in their community. "I didn't know she was a CEO. I didn't know she had never changed a diaper or made mac and cheese or read a bedtime story. I just knew she looked kind, even though she was frowning at her coffee." Victoria smiled, remembering that morning as if it were yesterday. Beside her, Michael squeezed her hand. "That one question changed my life," Jason continued. "Because sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is ask for what we need, even when we're afraid the answer might be no." He looked out at his classmates. "As we graduate today and move on to high school, we're going to face a lot of new challenges. New classes, new friends, new pressures. It's going to be scary sometimes. But I learned something important from that day in the coffee shop. The biggest opportunities often come disguised as impossible requests. Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes as their son, spoke with a wisdom beyond his years. So here's my advice, Jason said, his voice strong and sure. Ask the impossible questions, make the impossible requests, because you never know when someone will surprise you by saying yes, and that yes might just be the beginning of something amazing. As applause filled the auditorium, Victoria looked around at the life they had built. Michael, now running a successful small contracting business, his hands still calloused from honest work, but his shoulders no longer bowed by the weight of doing it all alone. Chance, gray around the muzzle now, but still faithfully by their side, wearing a ridiculous doggy bow tie for the occasion. Emma, who had become not just a colleague but a dear friend, sitting a few rows back with her husband and their toddler, the families from New Beginnings, many of whom had become part of their extended community. Their lives intertwined through shared experiences and mutual support, and Jason confident, compassionate, thoughtful Jason who had grown from a hopeful little boy into a young man they couldn't be prouder of, all because of one question, asked in a moment of childlike courage, all because of one answer, given despite a lifetime of caution. As the ceremony ended and Jason bounded toward them, grinning wide, Victoria thought about the words that had changed their lives. Could you be my mommy just for one day? What had started as temporary had become timeless. What had begun as pretend had become profoundly real. And what might have been just a day had become a lifetime. Mom, Dad, did you hear my speech? Jason asked, breathless with excitement. We heard every word, Michael assured him, pulling him into a hug. It was perfect, Victoria added, joining the embrace. Just like you. Jason rolled his eyes, now old enough to be embarrassed by parental affection. Mom, I'm not perfect. No, she agreed, smiling. You're better than perfect. You're real. And you're ours. As they walked out into the sunshine together, Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The path hadn't always been smooth. There had been stumbles and detours, moments of doubt and days of struggle. But there had also been laughter and growth, quiet triumphs and loud celebrations. There had been 1,000 ordinary days made extraordinary by the simple fact of being together. And in the end, that was the greatest gift of all, not the dramatic moments of rescue or revelation, but the steady, reliable presence of love in its most authentic form. A love that didn't need to be perfect, a love that didn't come with conditions or expiration dates, a love that said, I choose you, not just for now, but for always. A single father who had tried to stop his son from asking an impossible question, a CEO who had surprised herself by saying yes, and a little boy who had somehow known, with the wisdom that sometimes only children possess. That family isn't always what you're born into. Sometimes it's what you create, one brave question at a time.